When I heard the news that Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 was to include a spiritual successor of sorts to Call of Duty 4's outstanding All Ghillied Up, I was a very happy chappy indeed. All Ghillied Up is extraordinary, and so I was very intrigued to see how Recon By Fire, Modern Warfare 2's take on the concept, stacked up against it. The result, unfortunately, is a mixed bag. There's some great stuff, but it's accompanied by some baffling design choices, enough that I think the mission deserves a more thorough examination. Recon By Fire opens with a brief cutscene, and I'm going to use this time to give you a 2-sentence rundown of what's going on, just in case you're not familiar with the game's campaign. British Special Forces operatives Captain Price and Sergeant Garrick, who are referred to as Price and Gaz from here on out, are attempting to infiltrate a cartel base housed in a fishing hatchery on the Spanish coast, where they believe stolen missiles may be housed. At the same time, CIA agent Kate Laswell, a good friend of Price's, provides overwatch from a nearby boat as the pair start their approach. The two enemy soldiers being out ghillie suited during the opening I particularly enjoy.
Stand by. Guys?
Low wind, 200 meters. On me.
Bravo, what do you have?
However, there's little time to dwell on this early success as a ground team arrives on the scene and you begin to slowly make your way forward. These opening moments in particular are extremely reminiscent of Call of Duty 4's All Ghillied Up. The suits are probably the first thing most will think of when remembering that mission, but developer Infinity Ward really manages to nail the tone and atmosphere as well. While the Spanish coast may not be quite as threatening a landscape as the radioactive outskirts of Pripyat, the mist, the muted colour palette, and the countryside environment itself all serve to help make it abundantly clear that Recon By Fire is 100% meant to be considered a sequel of sorts to what is perhaps Call of Duty's most famous level. This is true in gameplay terms as well. Much like back in 2007, you'll spend these early stages taking cues from an AI partner as you first eliminate another pair of snipers before sneaking past both the ground patrol and a convoy heading towards the hatchery. It's a solid, if not entirely innovative, start, which also highlights one of the biggest issues with the mission as a whole, which is its pacing. Slowing things down is no bad thing, especially in the context of Modern Warfare 2's campaign, which lurches at breakneck speed between different styles of mission. And if the 3 minutes or so you spend crawling through the grass here were followed by events which were a little racier, there'd be no issue. But as we'll see as we continue further, Recon By Fire generally progresses at an almost glacial rate. Compare what I've just described to what happens over the same amount of time during All Ghillied Up's early moments. It did absolutely also begin at a fairly easy pace, but you were kept constantly engaged. In its first 3 minutes alone, you'd have likely snuck up on 2 guards and killed them, creeped past a house full of more enemies, taken down bad guys in and around a church, and hidden from a helicopter which passes overhead shortly after. I am by no means saying that a little less action on the front end of a level like this one is necessarily a terrible idea, but that's only true if what follows is paced extremely carefully, and I'm not convinced that's the case in Recon By Fire. You're next forced to lay low while a patrol walks right by you.
Hide your gun, Gaz. Try to anticipate the paths.
If you have to maneuver, do it slow and steady.
No quick movements. Keep your head still. It's gonna be close.
As direct a callback to All Ghillied Up as you could possibly ask for.
Easy, lad. There's too many of them. Let them go. Keep a low profile and hold your fire. Try to anticipate their paths. If you have to maneuver, do it slow and steady, no quick movements.
After which you take down 2 more guards, are introduced to the backpack mechanic, an addition I'm a big fan of which I'll touch on again shortly, and continue to move between cover until you're out of harm's way. It's not what happens during this section which I find interesting though, but rather what you might miss. The biggest reason I consider All Ghillied Up to be one of the finest levels in the FPS genre is because its scripting is so incredibly well thought out. You are always pushed towards sticking to the intended path, but at every step your actions are also accounted for through optional dialogue or slightly altered events if you decide to ignore Macmillan's instructions. You could, for example, choose to fight the helicopter using rockets left in the church tower instead of letting it pass by, with the church then getting destroyed in the ensuing chaos, and there are lots of other occasions where Macmillan will seemingly react on the fly to the choices you make.
Stop. That doesn't sound good.
Recon by Fire features a bigger deviation than any featured in All Ghillied Up, and Infinity Ward throws it in just seconds after the level begins. If you take down the ground patrol, the convoy, and any remaining enemies, you'll first hear some banter between Price and Gaz, something which continues throughout the mission and is done really well.
Not bad, Sergeant. A long way from your days on the police force. Let's keep moving.
That wasn't for me. I knew that the moment I saw you in Piccadilly Circus. Thank you, sir.
But you'll also not have to do any of the sneaking which follows. That's right, rather than spending a good 5 or 6 minutes crawling around in the dirt, you get to simply jog to the next section while engaging in some further optional dialogue.
Okay, for real? We met in London at a soccer game.
It's football. As well, it's football.
And that is exactly how I got him to talk to me.
Yeah, how'd that go?
Not well. John does not like to be bothered watching soccer.
Football. As well.
Works every time.
If I were being particularly cynical, I'd say the exchange between Price, Gaz and Laswell was likely the most cost-effective way of offering an alternative path after you've immediately deviated from the intended sequence, instead of, say, Infinity Ward having to script a whole new set of events to account for player choice. But even if that is the case, it continues and arguably expands upon what was included in All Ghillied Up, and so either way, I think it works rather well. Whether you go in guns blazing early doors or decide to follow Price's orders to the letter, you'll soon find yourself standing in the shadows of an enormous set of wind turbines looking down on the hatchery itself. This part of Recon by Fire, I think, is fantastic. You're tasked with taking out a plethora of baddies surrounding the compound's main building using your sniper rifle, while Price calls out how many notches on your scope to use to account for the Coriolis effect.
He's all alone. Compensate 3 notches for bullets.
Cartel kicking the bucket.
Nice shot.
You're also sometimes forced to relocate in order to line up 2 kills with 1 shot. Some of you watching may have found this quite arduous, and on repeat playthroughs I did too, but during your first time through, it does make the area feel more expansive and helps better illustrate that there is some scope in terms of choosing your angle of approach. If we are to consider this mission to be a sequel of sorts to All Ghillied Up, which as previously stated I definitely believe it to be, then to at least some degree we must treat it as such. A good sequel should take its cues from what came prior, but expand upon it in a meaningful manner while avoiding simply rehashing what came before, and I think this section does that. Recon by Fire's early stages were a solid but familiar foundation which built very little on what came before, whereas this one and that which follows are almost entirely new. There was a short, similar-ish sequence in the original Modern Warfare, during which you had to use flags blowing in the wind to work out where to aim. However, this one is different enough that it feels like something unique. In a way, I suppose you could argue that the level's opening rehash of All Ghillied Up was a necessity. Not only does it introduce you to the basics and some new mechanics such as the backpack, but it also reminds you of what came before. Everything up to the longer sniping sequence seems like little more than a prettier version of that you played a good 15 years or so ago, until you reach the next area where everything starts to feel fresh. I still think the opening is too slow, and placing another relatively sedate sequence directly after was something of a risk with regards to pacing, but if I'm being generous, I guess you could say that the early retread helps maximise the impact of the new stuff which follows after. Eventually, you'll finish whittling away at the cartel's numbers and are ordered to proceed onwards alone to search for the missiles. Before you can get there, you'll first have to avoid enemies heading your way in 2 vehicles.
You there yet, Sergeant?
Bloody hell, Laswell. It's a long way.
Hold up. Guys, you've got vehicles headed your way from the rear of the building. Appears they haven't seen you.
This sequence is essentially the same as earlier in the mission, except this time you can be anywhere in the area and the bad guys will come to you. How exactly they know where you are, I'm not so sure. Although this short set piece worked as intended on multiple occasions when I played Recon By Fire, I know a lot of people have had trouble avoiding the guards due to their inconsistent pathfinding. It's a great idea in principle, which builds off what happened in All Ghillied Up and earlier in this level. Again, precisely the sort of thing a sequel should be doing, but having watched footage of others having issues with it, I do understand why for some it proves to be a very frustrating experience. Arriving at the building you need to search, the backpack mechanic really begins to come into its own. There are a ton of options for how to get inside and clear it out. You can blow open one or more of the doors and use flashbangs, you can drop a smoke grenade or two to create cover, and you can even head to the roof and drop tear gas canisters into ventilation shafts to force your enemies outside. Again, this is a welcome expansion on All Ghillied Up, which gives you far more choice than you were ever given during that level, and it works really well. Personally, I prefer to use the tear gas as it's something a little bit different from the norm, but there's really no wrong answer. Searching the hatchery, there's not a missile to be found.
Holy hell. This is definitely a cartel outpost.
What do you see?
Metric shit ton of drugs. Warehouse is full of firearms, pills, raw materials.
Hassan's in deep with the cartel, but this isn't a drug bust. If those missiles are here, we need to find them.
Guys, be advised. You got armor patrols moving in from the other building.
And after fighting off the approaching squad and searching another nearby building, you're clear to proceed. At this point during my first playthrough of Recon By Fire, I was suitably impressed and quite excited to find out what would happen next. There had been the traditional All Ghillied Up style gameplay to kick things off, an almost entirely brand new sniping sequence, and a somewhat open section after. Well, open by Call of Duty's standards at least. I figured that next up would be a fast escalation in pace during the back half of the mission, with a few bombastic set pieces thrown in to really help ramp up the excitement. I mean, who can forget the sprint between jeeps towards the conclusion of All Ghillied Up, for example? Chuck in one or two moments like that, end the mission on a high, and I would have come away fairly impressed. Unfortunately, I was very disappointed to find that this is where a drastic shift in quality begins. There are no exciting set pieces from here on out. The buddy sniper concept is taken no further. Instead, you do everything you just did, for a second time. First, you take out more enemies from a distance with Price as your spotter. Again, although in fairness, you can just journey closer and take everyone on face to face if you prefer to do something different. Then you hide from enemies who arrive in vehicles. Again. And finally, you clear 2 more buildings of enemies. Again. It should also be noted that fighting through the buildings is especially irritating this second time due to the incredible amount of armoured enemies actively hunting you down. They are used far too frequently throughout Modern Warfare 2's campaign, and the latter stages of Recon By Fire is no exception. Some of you might think I'm exaggerating a touch here, but I find the inclusion of this second half to be disrespectful of the audience's time. I get that sometimes a bit of padding is needed in a game, but it all feels so very lazy. Infinity Ward could have at least mixed up the order of the 3 for the second half of the mission, or designed things in such a way that not quite so much running around is required to get everything done. The amount of sprinting across country landscapes during Recon By Fire's first half I think is okay given how novel much of the rest of its gameplay is, but during its second half when you're traversing empty landscapes to repeat the same tasks, not so much. I think Infinity Ward got themselves stuck somewhere in the middle. This level could and probably should have ended shortly after the first building clearing section. It would have made the mission shorter but a lot sweeter and would have hugely helped with pacing. Moving from the opening sneaking section to the sniping to finally taking the fight to the enemy is a logical escalation which definitely would have worked. On the other hand, it could have also ended with 1 or 2 more action-packed set pieces once the hatchery had been explored. Again, this would have been a sensible way to keep you on your toes without any hint of monotony ever threatening to creep in. As it stands, Recon By Fire has a great first half and then begins repeating itself for little reason. It destroys any sense of pacing and means by the time you finish it, you're glad it's over rather than left wanting more, and that's a real shame. There is a single section remaining which isn't a repeat of what occurred previously, as you discover a set of tunnels leading to a submarine.
May have found something here, Captain. Give us a hand, yeah?
I'll push you, pull. Think we found a passageway.
Good work.
Look at this.
Jackpot.
Be advised, multiple boats approaching my position.
Need help?
Could be fishermen. Stay on mission.
On me.
And the mission concludes as Laswell is captured by the enemy after a fairly dodgy final encounter which I don't really think works.
Get your fucking hands off of me!
Laswell! Laswell! She's on the AQ boat. They're taking her!
We got her, Captain. They took Laswell.
Well, let's get off the X and talk to Shepard. Let's go!
We need to get Laswell back.
Let's move.
When all is said and done, I think Recon by Fire is a level of two halves. Its first promises so much, and to a certain extent delivers. It has shades of All Ghillied Up, but also introduces its own twists on the familiar format, while offering more freedom than you were ever given during Call of Duty 4's magnum opus. Its second, however, is extremely disappointing, and really does mar the experience as a whole. Any sense of pacing is completely ruined, and the joy of stealth quickly transitions to the pain of repetition. And it's such a pity, as Infinity Ward was so close to crafting something genuinely fantastic. They didn't quite manage to match All Ghillied Up this time, but during Recon by Fire's first half at least, they did without doubt get pretty blooming close. Thanks for watching the video, boys, girls and ghillie-suited friends. If you had a sneakily good time, do consider liking, subscribing and letting me know your thoughts, and with any luck, I'll see you all again soon.